Hello, everyone. It is Friday, October 19th. This is sig-aws. I am your moderator for the day, Justin Santa Barbara. I work at Google. We have a couple of items on the agenda. The agenda should be in the chat. It's also on the calendar invite. If you would like to talk about something, it's great to put it on the agenda so we can be sure to get to it. And there is also an attendee list if you would like to add yourself to that list. Ideally, we have a notes taker. I don't know if anyone wants to take notes. I will do my best to do so if no one else steps up. But otherwise, I suggest we start up on the first item on the agenda, which is Ceph, an S3 bucket for AWS instance type JSON file.
Yeah, so this came up before, I think, in some of the COPS meetings, and I kind of agreed to do it and haven't started yet. But there are a bunch of AWS projects in Kubernetes, so like the cluster autoscaler, the EKS AMI, the VPC CNI, COPS, that all need some sort of information about EC2 instance types, like how much CPU, memory, ENIs, max pods, stuff like that. And then when you want to use a new AWS instance, let's say like an R5 or whatever, you'll run into this issue where like you'll spin up EKS cluster and it will allow you to use R5 because the EKS AMI supports that, but then you'll run into an issue where the VPC CNI doesn't support it yet. And then once you get past that, then you have to update the cluster autoscaler, and all of those projects have that information baked in so that you need a new release on every single project before you can start using that new instance type. So we had this idea of maybe moving that information to like a central place where all those projects can share, like let's say pull from a JSON file in S3, and then just pull that information at runtime so you don't have to have new releases to use a new instance type. So I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know how to get started on that, and if someone can just give me some direction on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in the past. I think it's a great idea. I think the canonical source, at least initially, is likely to be the pricing API. I think there's still some stuff that isn't even in the pricing API, so we'll have to like add to it. To me, this would make sense. I don't know if someone else is trying to talk. No, it's just my echo. I'm sorry. To me, it would make sense as a SIG subproject. I don't know whether we'll have more instances of this sort of thing, but it doesn't seem unreasonable to do it in a SIG subproject. I think if you wanted to get started, starting in any of the consuming projects, I mean, you'd be very welcome to doing COPS, but like, I'm pretty sure any of the projects would welcome a little tool script to build that sort of JSON file. Cluster API, Jason, are you?
Well, I was gonna ask if there is an approach taking that kind of path, it would probably be good to have some type of a fallback for people that want to limit external access as well.
I think that's very fair. So maybe one way to do that would be so currently, I guess everyone is effectively like building if everyone vendored in the library and the library contained the sort of fallback, I guess that would work. It's sort of more prescriptive than I was imagining, but I think it's a reasonable. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Having a good fallback is important, and I think this would be a very natural SIG subproject. I think we can. I don't know if anyone disagrees with that. I guess would be the first way to.
If it's vendored in, does that mean that you still need a new release in order to use new instance types?
Yes, but I mean, I think that's always going to be the case for a fallback, right? I don't know of. So I think one thing that's interesting is we are also talking there's another group called Kate's Infra. And I think they have a Slack channel, Kate's Infra team, and currently not a lot more. I think they're going to be a working group underneath primarily SIG release, I think, but I think they're cross SIG. And they are moving stuff to the CNCF, stuff being buckets and distribution of Kubernetes and Kubernetes projects and the testing infrastructure. So they're the team that's sort of working on that. I think as part of that, I've suggested that we have a way to download like binary artifacts like the COPS artifacts. This would be another. There's also another set of people that are working on like how we download images. This would be more like a binary artifact in that it's not a Docker image. You're not going to Docker pull this. It's unlikely you're going to Docker pull this database of machines. But one of the things I'm trying to get to is the idea that we have multiple sources. So it's not going to be good for air gap, but it's going to be good for like S3 is down or GCS is down. How do I get to the other one? So we could at least have that. And I think another thing we could do is we could start having, I'm trying to think about mirroring from the start. The idea being that, S3 is a mirror of GCS or GCS is a mirror of S3, but also, if you want to run an air gapped mirror somewhere, that should be something we support and don't make too hard. So maybe between those, the fallback will be less and less important. I guess the problem with the fallback in my mind is it's slightly annoying behavior if you're running an old version of cluster API. The primary source goes down, GCS goes down, S3 goes down, and then like this instance type doesn't work because it isn't baked into that binary that you happen to be using. That's a weird behavior as well.
Yeah, the only thing is that I know that I've worked with some customers in the past that have strict requirements on what external kind of services they're hitting. And, if it's always actively hitting some public service, those customers are going to have a pretty bad experience.
Yeah, that is reasonable. I think having the option to have it baked in is a great one. I think we can see if there are things which can operate without external dependencies, then I think it'd be great to have it like have a flag or something on them so that they could just run entirely internally. And I think if they are things which are always going to need something, like tying it to that other thing that they need anyway, might be a reasonable thing. But this is a very long. I think the short answer is let's do a sig sub project, unless anyone. So we'll do a straw poll now if anyone disagrees with that idea. And I think in terms of getting started, if you start it anywhere like COPS or Cluster API or any of the consuming projects, it should be very easy to move, or even on your own GitHub repo or whatever. It should be very easy to move into a sig sub project if that sounds good to you. So.
Okay.
And we have like a COPS bucket, and we'll be moving the COPS stuff into like the CNCF resources. So it will be great you're welcome to put it there temporarily as well. I don't know if we have other places for temporary storage, but you're welcome to put it there.
Okay, and you'd suggest using like generators for this, like to pull the pricing API and then hard code the rest, like the ENI information?
Yeah, I think like there's some of this in COPS now today, right? I think if we pull the pricing, if we have a tool that runs and pulls the pricing API, and then like adds whatever other information, I guess hard coding it. But I guess those hard coded things would have to be updated whenever there was a new instance family, probably. You could then run that job in CI, which would be interesting. I don't know that we would trust it to run every night and like update the live version, but we could look at putting them to CI so that I would start with just having it run manually and someone has to run it manually, but it would also be interesting to run it in CI and have it squawk at you if it was different, or eventually once we trust it, auto update.
Okay, and what about like, we kind of have to have buy-in from all the sub-projects on this, right? So it can be a waste of time to work on this if the cluster autoscaler doesn't want to implement it, or the EKS AMI, or VPC CNI.
Yeah, I don't know if people from those projects are there, I can speak for COPS, and we definitely want it there. And Jason, does Cluster API need this? The Cluster API provider, AWS provider?
I suspect we'd probably need something like it eventually. We haven't gotten to that point yet, though. So,
would you use something like, would you use a central Kubernetes database of instance types rather than building your own if it was available?
Definitely, because I definitely don't want to manage that list, statically by any means.
And I don't know if we have anyone that works on the VPC CNI here, the AWS VPC CNI. Is that the correct term? I'm sure we'll put it in the notes. And then to me, I think it's one of those things which no one particularly wants to do. And if you do it, it's pretty compelling. So I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about it. I don't know if anyone has any objections to the idea, so that they can do a sort of straw poll in terms of like, should this be a SIG project, a sub-project of SIG AWS? All right. Lazy consensus. I think we have a good consensus on that. I don't know if you want to start work on it somewhere, Seth, and then we can do a quick proposal, I guess, we'll send it to the SIG AWS mailing list and formalize it at the next SIG AWS meeting, if that makes sense. Okay. And then we're also, and we should also have the buckets coming. And you're welcome to use the COPS bucket if you want to, and you're welcome to put code in COPS if you want to start putting it in there and move it around later.
Okay, maybe I'll start with the existing generator in COPS, have that generate a JSON file, and then add a new generator to add the Go code from the JSON file instead of from the pricing API.
Yeah. So you're talking about for COPS, or you mean for the COPS fallback, or okay? Yeah.
The idea would be that instead of using the existing generator in COPS, we'd have a new generator that pulls from the JSON file, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think you need to. Sorry. So no, I think COPS should parse the JSON file, because ideally we would just get rid of the hard-coded Go object instantiations, and we just replace it with a embedded Go file that, if we wanted a fallback. For COPS, I don't know if it matters. I guess it does matter. Yeah. For COPS, we can still run offline. So yeah, I guess we do need it. Well, sort of fun. I mean, if you're, I don't know.
Well, yeah. just not to change the existing implementation in COPS, just swap it out to read from a JSON file, with the generator to generate the Go code. So just be an extra step.
Yeah, I mean,
have that JSON file available to other projects to generate their own Go code from. So it'd still be compile time, but at least it would be from the same source. And then we could work on getting it to be potentially have a flag to enable runtime updates.
Yeah, we can. I mean, we can also. I guess that's good. We can also just look at whether it's easier just to parse the JSON on the fly as every time. It might be.
Okay.
But yeah, that's great. Thank you for taking that on. I think that'll be really awesome, and it will address a lot of it's also frustrating when one thing is updated but the other one isn't.
Yeah.
You get COPS to install and autoscaler doesn't work, or you get autoscaler to work but COPS can't work with it, and those sort of things.
Yeah, that's currently how it's been working. I think the R5s and the C5s, they're not usable yet because you need it everywhere.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Okay.
Jason, did you want to talk about Cluster API?
Yes. So I've already added a link in the notes. We've had our initial release of Cluster API provider for AWS. It's pretty rough at this moment, not very configurable, but we wanted to get something out there sooner rather than later to give people a chance to kick the tires. Right now, we are currently actively working on updating the implementation to use the new CRD-based approach that is recently merged in the main cluster API project. So if you take a look at the provider now, the current state of master is pretty broken as we continue to work through some of those fixes. But we hope to definitely have those kind of sorted out, because we're planning on demoing the CRD-based provider at the upcoming community meeting next week. So hopefully we'll have a nice new demo. Maybe some new functionality, I don't know yet, but we'll at least be on the CRD-based cluster API, so no more aggregated API server. Yay. So that's pretty much the current state. The CRD migration has taken us a little bit longer than we had initially anticipated, but otherwise I think things are moving along pretty well.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think that will be a great thing, like to get the logic so that all the tooling sort of behaves very similarly. I think will really help matters a lot. And Peter, a question on cluster autoscaler, which actually might tie right back into what we just talked about, I guess, the two other items.
Yeah, I was dealing with an issue with EBS volume, zone awareness scheduling, and how the autoscaler fits into that. And while I was digging through GitHub issues on the autoscaler repo, I noticed that none of the maintainers actually have AWS accounts. And so there's no one testing in any of the AWS code. And so I'm wondering if someone from AWS or sig-aws would be able to provide, either maybe test infrastructure or just time spent on the project.
Yeah, so this is Guho from AWS, and then I can contact Nishi to give access to our testing AWS account, and then if you can share the link to the issue or project, I can just forward it to Nishi.
Okay, I will add it to the notes.
Okay, thank you.
And there are, I mean, AWS is already paying for an account under the CNCF for running E2E type tests. So if there are E2E type tests, they can be run on AWS. I don't know if they are currently run on AWS. Interestingly, this actually could be something we could do in, I guess this would be COPS. So there are currently all the E2E tests are run on COPS or run via COPS on AWS. And that will likely change in future, but if we installed the cluster autoscaler as part of either a E2E or something, if we got the cluster autoscaler installed on there, I believe there are E2E tests. My guess is we're skipping them because COPS is not installing the autoscaler, I think. But I'll have a look at that as well. And I don't know if you had if you were facing a particular issue. I would hope that the volume and zonal logic should be the same in GCE and AWS. Like it's basically just labels. So if there is something that's interesting.
Yeah, my issue was with how I set up my ASG. I had one ASG spanning 3 availability zones. And the way the cluster autoscaler works is it builds what's called a node template of what a node would look like if it was newly launched in an autoscaling group. And it happened to be a different AZ than the one I needed. And so it said, this ASG won't create a node in the required ASG, in the required AZ, so I'm not going to scale it up. And the solution is to create one ASG per AZ and feed them all to the cluster autoscaler, and then it's able to pick the correct ASG to scale up. But that's not documented anywhere. I was going to open a documentation pull request in the autoscaler repo, and that's when I noticed that none of them are actually using it in AWS.
My guess is that the same thing would happen in GCE. I'm reasonably sure that MIGs which are the AWS ASG equivalent, can like span zones. So it's not necessarily even it's not necessarily specifically a problem here with just the AWS coverage. And I think the other, I guess, piece of good news is that like this is some of what Cluster API is going to hopefully address, is having the ability to either directly launch the exact machine we want, or I guess this is actually an interesting piece of feedback on if we use ASGs to back machine deployments and machine sets in the Machines API, we still have to be aware of this sort of thing. The fact that we can't just scale up the ASG. We have to, in fact, launch an instance and add it to the ASG, I guess, which is a bit of a bummer. Nadir, did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No, oh, I misclicked early. I was just reading the issue that was linked, and the issue is around credentials. So, and I think it's more of a user question in this case, and the maintainers are saying we don't have AWS accounts to even begin to help you. So I think this is more like, are there people with AWS knowledge who can triage on that autoscaler project, probably?
Yeah, I was, that issue was just an example of finding a comment from a maintainer where they mentioned that they don't have AWS accounts. So that was the red flag to me.
We should at the very least make sure that we have E2E coverage. It is harder for people inside Google to use AWS, just like it is harder for AWS people, I'm sure, to run on Google. The politics are tricky, and the legal stuff is tricky. I don't know if it's actually tricky or just that people worry that it's tricky, but that's sort of how it is. And so I don't know if there's anyone on Autoscaler who is not employed by Google. I'm just wondering about the list of owners. Anyway, I will try to figure out who those people are, and yeah, it's a good point. And we should at least make sure that either in COPS or in other tests, EDE tests that we're adding, that we make sure that we have coverage of autoscaling on AWS. And on GCE if we don't have it already, but I'm pretty sure we have it on GCE. I think that's the end of our agenda for the day. I don't know if anyone, oh, there we are.
Sorry, I threw something else on there.
That's all right.
I wanted to see if it would be possible to start recording and posting the SIG AWS meetings. I know in the past I've tried to catch up on past meetings, and sometimes some of the context doesn't quite make it into the meeting notes. So having the recordings available would be helpful for people to kind of catch up, I think.
So good news and bad news. Well, good news, bad news, and very bad news. The good news is I've been recording them, as have others. The bad news is I have not been posting them yet because I've been told to post them in order. The better news there is I've started posting, and I think I'm up to August 2017. I guess the very bad news is there are about 26 hours of videos about to hit YouTube. So if you're planning on catching up, you need to block off your weekend. But yes, you are absolutely right. We should do that. The other problem is I've been told to post them in order. Maybe I can see if I can get a little waiver on that, because it is annoying. Because I feel like, so I'm missing mid-August 2017. And I'm like, is it worth, should I just post this week's, or should I find August 2017, right? The common sense answer might be in conflict with my instructions so far. So I will clarify those instructions.
All right, thanks.
And now we have reached the end of the agenda. I don't know if anyone would like to add anything or bring up anything. Or people want to get some time back in preparation for watching 26 hours of SIG AWS videos. Looks like that's the case. Everyone's hitting subscribe on that YouTube channel. All right, well, I wish everyone a very happy weekend, and thank you so much for attending. And see you in 2 weeks.